appreciate you taking the time to speak to me today and answer some of the burning questions that not only I've had, but a lot of the members of our Black Swan community have had.
Yeah, no, this is great, Michael. I'm glad we're sitting down doing this, right? You've been a bit of a partner of ours for a while now in our social media efforts, and what you're doing with the Black Swanlings group, and the way that you are helping translate tactical empathy specifically for the software sales industry is phenomenal, right? You're doing a great job bridging that gap. So I'm just happy to be here, man.
No, absolutely. And to your point, just to give some context, so a little introduction about myself. I've been working in enterprise SaaS, software as a service, for just about the last 9 years. And in the beginning of 2020, I started reading Never Split the Difference, became obsessed, really transformed the way that I communicate, not only as a professional, but also personally. At that point, I created the Black Swanlings LinkedIn group, which is a community for business professionals to ask questions specifically around the Black Swan method, tactical empathy, anything Never Split the Difference related. So that's how you and I connected, and we've been partnering for the past 6 months or so to help cultivate that community and be a resource for those out there trying to become better communicators.
That's right. That's right. The best way to end that. That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right, Mike. I love what you're doing, man. You're the other thing I like about working with you specifically is you clearly conceptualize this stuff at a higher level than the average bear, and then your ability to put it into practice is second to none in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that was a big challenge for myself as I started to conceptualize the tactics, is how do I apply that specifically towards my role as a customer success manager within software as a service. So I think that's a good segue into the basis of our conversation today, which will be around how to specifically apply the Black Swan method and tactical empathy towards software as a service. So no surprise, the software and technology space is one of the biggest out there, right? It's attracting the top talent amongst recent grads, as well as just the IT spend amongst companies, enterprise companies, is set to go over 4 trillion in 2021. So it's not going away. It is the future, and that's really where I saw a lot of value, is how can the community wrap their head around the Black Swan method specific towards their role, right? So there's 3 core roles within the software sales space on a go-to-market side. So we're thinking about SDRs, which are your top of funnel folks who are doing a lot of cold calling, trying to set up meetings for their account executives, account managers. Then you have your account executives who are in full closing roles, who are responsible for bringing in net new revenue, net new logos. And then you have folks like myself who are in customer success roles, where it's our main responsibility to ensure that we're delivering value to clients on the post-sale side, and we're able to define what success looks like to them and ensure that we're continually working towards those goals. So I think today's conversation will focus on questions that align very closely to those 3 specific roles.
I love it, man. I love it.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. Within the B2B SaaS space, there's a lot of premeditated engagements across the life cycle with customers. So if you're thinking about it from a customer success perspective, there's kickoff meetings, there's executive business reviews, so on and so forth. Once we're setting a specific agenda for these calls, you're really responsible for doing a lot of the talking. This might sound like I'm asking for your secret sauce here. How do you best prepare for these types of engagements, and what type of sequence of tactical empathy tools can you think about beforehand to deploy for the call?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, I love the fact that you brought this up, because what a lot of people miss about, especially from Never Split the Difference and hostage negotiation foundation of this, is hostage negotiators are never on the seller side, right? They're always buyers. And so when you're not buying, right, how does this stuff translate from a straight seller's perspective. So just the fact that you wanted to capture that in any format is great. And so first things first, right? When you're under pressure to do a lot of the talking, right? Especially as a seller, the classic go-to statements, phrases, pieces of the value proposition, however you want to state it, that you would normally want to explain. The first thing to do is to turn all of those statements into calibrated questions. That's the first thing, because any purpose of explaining anything to anybody is because we want them to think about it, right? We want them to genuinely take it into consideration. And if we explain it to them, we hope that that's what happens next, right? As you know from the book, hope is not a strategy. So what's the skill that's designed to trigger deep thought and to actually take people's brain to another place? It's calibrated questions. So that's really the first thing. And it's much easier said than done, right? And so a quick example of that, a classic question, right, from our sales side, as the Black Swan Group, as we've been continuing to evolve, is doing follow-up with our clients and how important follow-up is. Now, we started out by explaining it, right? Like, we can't move the needle for your group if we don't have these follow-up sessions. And the follow-up sessions are designed to do this, and this should be something you add as part of your package in order to make sure that you get as much out of your training as you possibly can. We just simply switch that explanation to, what plans do you have in place to make sure you get the most out of your training? After the training's over, what steps have you already decided on so that the content is not lost over the coming year? And that turned into, well, it sounds like we probably need some kind of follow-up. You guys have a follow-up program you can put us in? And now we're having a completely different conversation where they feel like they have led us to the point. And so that's really where it starts, right? What are the things you want them to understand for very good reason? And how do you actually get them to think about it by presenting it in question format? Usually a what is going to be the type of question that you're going to use. Because again, right, for everybody's listening, what questions are designed to reveal challenges and obstacles and potential hurdles that we all got to get over together.
So put it on them and give them the illusion of control with a what question, and then prepare maybe a few labels based off of what you might be able to predict that the answer they might come back with.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, right? From a conceptual perspective, right? If you're actually trying to put the words in place, what are your plans for? What have you already decided on? And then just finish it in regards to this particular term, or how you're going to make sure that everybody gets caught up on this technology, or everybody's utilizing it to the point that they can, right? We've already got all the processes to make them do that. We just need to get them to think about the genuine value in actually engaging in those things. And it's going to be in question format, to your point.
No, I like that a lot. Also, I also think about accusation audits. So like for me, in a kickoff meeting where I will be doing most of the presenting, these folks who have just become customers, they have an expectation that was set during the pre-sales process. So it's important for me to align with the sales rep, make sure what those expectations are, kind of re-articulate and confirm what we've heard during the pre-sales process and spit that back to them. But then also kind of alleviate or diffuse any negative perceptions that they might have coming into the relationship. So for me specifically, our technology is AI centered. So, with AI comes a lot of concern, right? Maybe AI is going to take your role, or, you might be skeptical that AI can perform at a high level, or you might be concerned that AI is going to replace your role. So for me, what I've done is I've implemented accusation audits in the very, very beginning of the conversation. Like, without further ado, we're happy to have you on, and then I'll dive into it with an ask. And my ask is typically, I have a really difficult ask for you, and then I'll outline the audit based off of the AI potential objections, and then I'll go into an ask around. My ask is that you approach this project with a high level of collaboration and with an open mind. what are your thoughts on that?
You know, there's a lot of things that I like about that. I mean, as for those of you that are actively using accusations audit, it's really a great way to set emotional anchors to a certain degree, especially when that emotional anchor is in reference to a negative or something that could easily be perceived as a negative. And so I actually like that a lot. You know, and even you could change it up, right? I don't know if I would necessarily say this is how you improve that, because there's so much there that's really good. However, there might be a way to, right? How do we change it up a little bit? How do we experiment with it? How do we continue to tweak it? And this idea of having the open mind, right? Coming at this with a mindset of learning more as opposed to shutting down everything that seems foreign or new, that could be part of the accusations audit, right? As we go down this process, it's going to be difficult to keep an open mind. There are going to be new things and new ideas that are presented to you where your initial reaction to it is going to be pushback, right? And right, because we want to mitigate those things when we get down the line and they get introduced to them. So how do we start to diffuse that up front, start to break it apart, right? And that's one of the ways to do it. So the wording in there I like a lot, right? The beginning part is you know, much more of, like, I would say, a cold read in a lot of ways, right? That's not an official term here at the Black Swan Group. For if anybody's familiar with a 3-step process for negotiating a hotel upgrade, right? The first part of that is doing a real cold read of them. Something to the effect of, right, this is going to make your day worse. This is going to confuse you. This stuff's going to come at you really fast and it's going to be hard to keep up with. But like doing that up front, right, letting that sit with them and then going further into your accusations audit that's followed up by an ask in the form of like a no-oriented question that you laid out. Like that is that right there, when it comes to sequence, like that's it. Like that's really it. And how you move words around or what aspects of that 3-step process you want to emphasize with your tone of voice, it's really kind of up to you. And I love experimenting with this stuff, right? This is how we got this far, is by playing with it a little bit. So, you know, move the ask around, right? Move some of those words into the audit, move some of the audit words into the ask, just to experiment and see how people respond to it, right? Because I think the biggest mistake that I think I've made in the past is when I've got a system, then I'm like, that's the system, right? I don't change it at all. I don't focus on evolving it because it works 10 out of 10 times. Well, that doesn't mean there's not still a better one. And so I like a lot of the thought process around that. When you are throwing that out at them, what mental barriers do you know that are already in their head that you're trying to get rid of?
Really, the replacing the work that they do. That's the biggest negative that needs to be diffused early on.
Mm-hmm.
So when I've deployed that, I've gotten a lot of, you know, from it depends what stakeholder is on the call, right? So we'll have multiple levels, whether they're the executive buyer or they're probably going to be the users. Mm-hmm. So the users are one that are really, really concerned around their job being replaced. So, you know, we might get a response from the executive buyer like, oh, no, we're completely committed to this project. You know, we're investing in this automation, so on and so forth. But, you know, it might be the user who's the one that needed to be diffused with. So it's interesting, and I think that's really where a lot of the challenge that I've had around accusation audits is where do we take them next, right? After your delivery, it's the part 2. It's, you know, do I follow up with the no-oriented question? Do I follow up with a calibrated question? So I think that kind of cold read aspect, to read and react once you've delivered it, is super important, and it's something that you need to practice, right? It's not, you know, you have to think kind of forward, not too forward, but be able to improvise and know where you want to take it based off of the response that you get.
Yeah, that's really good. So that presents a couple of different options at the very beginning. And one of the things that, you know, based on circumstance, right? Circumstance is going to drive our strategy. One of the things I like to assume, especially if it's a new client, new entity, or someone's coming, they're being introduced to the space in a lot of ways, is I assume that I understand a lot of their plight, a lot of their fears, a lot of their worry, but then I also assume that I probably don't understand them all. And so I worked it into the accusations audit, right? That's, you're probably worried about this, you're probably worried about that, you're probably worried about this, just like you did. And then also adding in, obviously there's several things I stated I already know you got a problem with. I wouldn't be arrogant enough to assume that I understand your entire viewpoint. What else did I miss? What concerns did I leave out? It seems like I probably didn't hit everything. And now it's completely back in their court to go from there and be like, no, hey, Michael, actually, you hit it all, man. That's exactly what we're worried about. This, and this. Those are our top 3 things. You hit all 3. Or, right, obviously, actually, here's another thing that you left out that's really top of mind for us. And it allows them to choose. And the other thing is, you got a great natural read of a person, whether you're just simply listening to them on the phone or you're watching them virtually, or you got the luxury of being with them in person. And for a guy like you, you're going to be able to see the apprehension. You're going to be able to see certain little body movements and things that are like, okay, something is out of alignment here, and you're going to label it, right? Seems like there's something out of alignment. Seems like something top of mind. That's another crucial part of that. We've actually gone to lately referring to it as gathering data with your eyes. There's actually almost a period of time where until you've developed the skill where you're almost shutting your ears off and you're simply watching for everything that they do and then using that to structure your labels. And like, you got a great feel for that. I think that's something that everybody needs to work on, right? And it's like, okay, well, physically, what did they tell me when I got done with my audit? Did their body language tell me that they're fully confident that I understand everything? Or did their body language tell me like, actually, there's another thing here, but I don't know if now's a good time to bring it up. Maybe we should wait till later, right? Or is it anger, frustration, whatever it is? What is that physical tell when you get done with your audit? And then that's what you label.
Yeah, I really like the question of, what did I miss, or what else did you feel is important to add here? It really almost, it prompts you the one way where you're getting agreement. So you've done your job with the audit, or they're going to lay out some other concerns and you need to continue to diffuse that. So I think that's a really good strategy to consider once you're deploying the audit, is asking that question is, what else do you feel is important to add here? Or, what did I miss, right? So it clearly puts you down the path and kind of defines where you should go next.
Yeah, that is a great point. And that's also one of those moments where triggering deep thought is very advantageous to us, which is why we use the question format, especially in that case at the beginning of an interaction. And to kind of sew it up on both sides, right? As I mentioned earlier, if you know this direction you're going to go with your audit, which you should have decided before you get in the room, then the last line of your audit should be, right? I don't want to assume that I've captured all of your thoughts, right? I don't want to be arrogant enough to think that I fully understand your perspective. What else did I miss? Right? And the more that we can trigger, no, you hit it on the money. The more that we can lean in the direction for that is in fact what we're looking for. Not only does it make it easier to do that, but it does make it more comfortable for them to correct. And then as a follow-up, right, general rule, general guideline of tactical empathy, anytime you ask a calibrated question, be prepared to label the answer. Right? You don't got to worry about trying to respond or add your own feedback. The only thing you need to worry about is label whatever they use to answer that calibrated question.
Agreement equals trust.
There you go. And I'd say even a step before that, understanding. Right? That's really, people trust those they feel understood by.
That's a good segue into my next question, which is around labels. So labels are extremely effective in terms of information gathering. So across the whole sales cycle, whether it's your first touch from an SDR, or if you're in a 3-year relationship with a customer, it's a continuous information gathering process, right? And labels are extremely effective in gathering information. So something that I've, struggled with, and it takes a lot of time, is deep labels versus, surface level labels. So it's very easy to say that, you hear someone say something and you say, it sounds like you're frustrated, versus really honing in on reading in between the lines and giving a label that's the underlying behavior, right? The why behind the behavior. So talk to me about how do you build up that kind of strength, that mental strength to really read between the lines and deploy an effective label that's going to give you a lot of information and, hit that person's core.
Yeah, great question. And it's for somebody like you, right? It's stuff like this comes naturally, but not everybody, picks up on it right away. And the reality is being able to do that starts with us first. And the first thing is we got to let go of this natural human need to be affirmed or be told that we're right, because that's the need that drives us to label correctly all the time. And that's what holds us back sometimes from wanting to label is, I don't know if my label's right. So I ain't gonna say it because it might be wrong. And once we completely let go of that, number one, it allows us to be corrected. It allows us to somewhat search for correction. And then the other thing, the other side can feel it, because just like when we try to get them to say yes, they can feel that coming. They can also feel when we're making a genuine attempt to understand, even when we're completely off base. But because we're making the genuine attempt to understand, when we're off base, they want to correct us. Like, man, Michael worked really hard to figure out exactly what we're dealing with. I'm not going to scream at him because he took a misstep. I'm going to work really hard to get him back on track. So some of that is just mentally being able to let go of, I need to get it right every time. The second part of that is for us to also let go of our own data and justifications, right? The other barrier to labeling or listening at a deeper level is because we're focused on, we got to make sure we say this before this conversation's over. We need to make sure we get this message across before we get out of this meeting. All of that stuff is a mental distraction from the moment. And so once you've got those two licked, as it were, it's much easier to proceed from there. The problem is those first two pieces are actually really hard. We're wired to be that way, right? The education system has set us up to think in that manner. And so letting go of it is much harder said, much easier said than done. But then when we go in, being willing to almost offend the other side, at least for me personally, I think this is the way I look at it. So I can speak from a personal perspective. But being willing to offend them in some way because of a misstep on my label freed me up to label a lot more things that might seem really innocuous or maybe even non-existent, but I'm going to label it anyway because it might be an issue. And the more corrections or no's that I get triggered with a label, right? So I have a tendency to lean on mislabels for those that are familiar with the terminology. For all intents and purposes, the more points I feel like I earn. Because number one, they're willing to educate me, which gives me a huge advantage. And then number two, the other big part of that is I'm not a threat. It's really interesting when when you combat mentally, or there's a struggle over who holds the best data or who understands the future more. It's really much more of this. But as soon as you're willing to be corrected, said no to, or be set straight to a certain degree, right? If that's the persona, the energy that you're creating, you become a lot less intimidating. And the less intimidating you are, the more open people are, the more willing they are to share. And it's just really interesting how that works mentally and emotionally with human beings, right? If you're a rival mentally with me, then I'm going to want to hide things from you. If I don't see you as a rival, then I'm willing to be open and honest and let things slip that I might not normally say. And you can create all of that by labeling at a deeper level. And so life narratives, previous experiences, history of the industry, those are generally going to be the top three things that are going to help you get to a deeper level, because there are fears incorporated with each one of those aspects of their line of business.
Right. You should, as an expert in your role and in your field, you should be able to almost anticipate those answers and kind of get a sense of what that person has feeling, or that specific persona. If you're selling to marketing managers, you should know the pains that they feel and be ready to label. If it feels like your team is under a lot of pressure right now, or it feels like this is really important to you. So having that framework kind of in your mind, as well as knowing what the typical pain points are, will help you label at a deeper level.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the other thing, we're talking about opening conversations up, right? Depending on where you are in the sales cycle. But at the beginning of the conversation, circumstantially, a label at the beginning of the conversation may actually be the best place to start, right? If you know that there's general worry around AI and the technology space, if you know that a lot of that worry is based on lack of education, misunderstanding, status quo, whatever those things may be, they're bringing all that stuff with them, and their perspective on how those things affect their world is only lives in their mind. That's one of the interesting things about it. Doesn't live anywhere else except in the mind of the people you're talking to. And so opening things up with, it seems like you got a lot of questions around this that we should probably start with. That might be an opening line, depending on where you are in the sales cycle, right? The accusations audit may be, you don't need your time wasted. I know you got a lot of questions and concerns about this. Would it be a problem if we put the presentation aside and started with those things? It feels like you got a concern you want to get off your chest right away. That may be a great way to start a conversation, depending on where you are in the sales cycle. So labels are probably the most flexible skill that we teach, because they can literally go anywhere. You can use them to open a conversation, you can use them to close the deal and get final agreement, right? And everything in between.
Yeah, I think for sure labels are my most frequently used Black Swan method tactic. And I've had a lot of focus on how can I label deeper, because once you start doing the surface level labels, you don't get that opening of the floodgates of information like you do when you actually hit the nail on the head with a deeper one.
Yeah, and then upward inflection, downward inflection, right? How your tone is involved. Do an upward inflection, right? That be focused, especially if you were in a sales role of any sort. Having an upward inflection at the end of your labels is always going to assist you. Exactly to your point.
For sure. What about copywriting? I know this is definitely something that comes up often in the community, is best practices around deploying Black Swan method over email. So I think most frequently people have questions around cold emails. So if you're in, let's say, an SDR type role, how do you best deploy, let's say, an accusation audit in a cold first touch email? And I know there's Josh Braun, who puts out a lot of content around kind of cold emails, and he's a huge fan of Black Swan. Chris, I think, did an interview with him, so he puts out a lot of good content on it. But I'd be curious to understand from you, what's really the best practices around deploying Black Swan method over email, specifically for cold emails?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this is one that does come up a lot. So, first thing, we have a tendency to treat email communication very much like a marketing campaign, in that any marketing campaign is designed to bring a person to action of some sort, right? Which is where the whole CTA, the call to action idea, comes from. And you don't put a marketing campaign out without a call to action. Same thing with an email. There's got to be a call to action in an email. Very similar to the marketing campaign process. You can't have too many CTAs, right? You don't put 40 or even as many as 5 in a single marketing campaign, right? It's 1 or 2, maximum of 3. Don't give people too many choices. Their brain goes to too many places. Same idea with the email communication. If you got a question you want to ask them, make sure it's one question. If there's 4 or 5 questions you want to ask them, then either spread it out over a few emails or drive them to a verbal conversation where you can follow up. And so ending on a call to action is always going to be big. In addition, and I know Chris talked about this as well, email softeners, right? We have a tendency to write our whole email out and then plug in "I'm sorry" or "I'm afraid" in as many places as we can, right? I'm sorry to drop this at your feet. I'm afraid it's going to cause this problem. You know, is it ridiculous for us to talk on Thursday, right? Bang, 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 1, 2, 3. And that's again, basic sequence. Issue, what the problem might be as a result, call to action. And so another piece of this, because I know accusations audits been something we've talked some about, and people want to use accusations audits in emails. Something to be careful of is the accusations audit was originally designed to be delivered verbally. And so all the basic guidelines about being extremely robust and going over the edge and then stopping with dynamic silence doesn't necessarily translate to text verbatim in email. And so a couple adjustments there. First of all, you can't end your audit with silence because there's no call to action there, right? Like, I know you think this, I know you think this, send, right? There's no action item there for them. And the void that silence creates verbally, again, is non-existent in email communication. So that's one thing. Another part of it is the simplicity of your accusations audit, right? An accusations audit can be so robust that you might make the email longer than it needs to be just with the audit. You haven't gotten anything yet and gotten to any issues yet, right? So keep it a general email, 8 sentences or less, right? Don't want to write a bunch of paragraphs. General rule. Accusations audit should only be 1 or 2 lines, right? 3 lines max. Don't want to go too far beyond that, because we don't want to create the sense of this is, when are they just going to get to the point, right? And as they're reading the email. And then the classic no-oriented question CTA is always a good one. We also have a tendency to use thought-shaping questions, especially if we're going to continue via email, right? We're not necessarily driving them to a verbal conversation, but we're going to continue our conversation via email. How bad would it be? What sort of problem would it cause? How much trouble would I get you in? Right? Questions along those lines tend to be our call to action at the end. And then the action is, respond via email rather than schedule a phone call.
For sure. So keep it focused, keep it simple, short and sweet. Look at 1 or 2 tactics to deploy, always effective in terms of the no-oriented question at the end. I would like something like, would you be opposed to learning more? And keeping short the accusation audits to something like, this might sound obvious, or this is probably going to sound like a imposition or something of that nature.
Yeah. So verbal general rules of the accusations audit, right? You make your list and you essentially number your top 2. What the most important one on your list is, and what the second most important one is. Verbally, you open with your second most important and you end with your first most important. Via email, same process, pick out your top 2 and then just stick with the number 1 on the list, right? And if you feel like you need to go further, incorporate 1 and 2, but don't go further than that. And sticking to 2 or 3 tactical empathy skills in total is a good rule of thumb, based on what you said, because there's not enough room in an email to execute the entire N9, right? You're gonna have to pick 2 or 3 skills and just lean on those and keep it short.
For sure. Yeah, that's a good segue into my last question. I know we're coming up on time here. So many people have read the book and they get really inspired right afterwards, and they want to practice the tactics and know how to apply them and start applying them. And then they kind of fall off, right? It's like that new shiny thing that you learn about, and then you kind of lose track of it. What do you suggest in terms of next steps? There's a general interest where someone has that kind of aha moment. How do they keep on track? What sort of resources do they need to continue to hone their skills, their communication skills, and what's available to them through the Black Swan Group?
Yeah, no, great question. So, we got a plethora of classes on our website, right? blackswanltd.com, in the training section for individuals and corporations alike. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that I won't waste your time getting into. But for us personally, what we have found is when someone can a string of wins at the very beginning, it tends to instill the tactics in their mind and drive that desire to continue to learn and improve. And one of the ways to do that is, call up your most expensive utility and renegotiate that bill. That's a great way to start. You save money right off the bat. You hang up the phone, right? You're like, okay, all right, I saved $30 a month or whatever it is. And that's one kind of proof of concept for you personally. That's one way to do it. Another one is general conversations at home, spouses, kids, things of those nature. But even more focused than that, the relationships in your life that you already know need improvement. Pick those people out, right? Put a pin in them, as it were, like you're working Google Maps, right? You're putting a pin on them, and take the skills directly to them, right? It's been difficult for you to communicate with that person up to now anyway. Let me experiment with some tactile empathy and see how far we can get, right? And if in fact it doesn't work, I'm no worse off than I was when this conversation started. But using that as an initial target of something to dig out of a hole is actually another great way to get proof of concept for yourself. In addition, there's a couple of books that we recommend. Beyond Winning by Robert Mnookin is one. Chapter 2, The Tension Between Empathy and Assertiveness, is something we recommend highly. Everybody that we coach, we point them right at that chapter in that book almost immediately. That's one. And simple Google searches on brain function, how to actually increase dopamine or serotonin or oxytocin in the brain, right? As those chemicals are being dumped in to the neural process, how do we actually affect those things verbally? And if you can understand it from a brain function side, then you can start to figure out how to influence it during the process of communication. So those are kind of some general things to start with. I think another big thing that's been a help is, and again, this starts internally, is working at being conscious of it, right? Like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, those guys never got to a point where shooting 100 shots in a row, right, and having to make all 100 of them was just natural for them. It was a routine that they decided was a lifestyle that they were not going to give up because they knew every time they did it, it made them better. That's a decision we got to make for ourselves too, right? There's certain aspects of this that we're going to have to continue to push actively and be committed to the transformation. And that's a decision we make ourselves, right? Chris Voss likes to say all the time, you got 3 choices every day. You can stay the same, you can get worse, or you can get better. And every day, everybody's got the same choice. And that's a big part of just kind of sticking with it, right? Staying in the saddle, as it were.
Yeah, all about building systems and routines that you can consistently measure, as well as put yourself in a position to kind of check the boxes and get those small wins, right? You don't want to put too much on yourself. I think, like you alluded to before, getting those first couple of small wins really catapults you into building a consistent kind of process and routine to get yourself better.
Yeah, and two kind of one of the reasons that you're working so hard with the Black Swanlings group is because it creates a learning community. And so engaging with at least a learning partner, or engaging with someone that you're trying to teach it to, right? Trying to teach something to somebody while you're learning it, there's no quicker way to wrap your mind around it. There really isn't, because when you teach it, you got to explain it in a different way than you actually understand it yourself. And then when you're teaching somebody, they're going to ask you questions that you may never have considered before, that you're going to work really hard to wrap your mind around. And it's actually, right, Daniel Coyle in the book, The Talent Code, talks about what it takes to actually make the brain learn faster. That's probably a piece I would say that he left out. Trying to teach somebody something while you're trying to learn it yourself will increase brain function and increase your ability to conceptualize faster than we could ever imagine.
Yeah, and also in terms of resources and materials, the Edge, the blog that you guys have is incredible. I mean, it's so digestible, short, sweet, to the point, but also high impact, right? Really clearly articulated on how to use the skills and how to apply them to certain situations. So I would highly recommend opting into that blog. I think once a week you guys send it out.
Yeah, every Tuesday morning about 9 a.m. in your local time zone, it's going to hit your email inbox. And to your point about the resource that it is, right? Because most people's blogs are just noise in a lot of ways. And we really focus down on every time you read it, it's gonna help you solve a problem. And in that regard, our topics come from a lot of different areas. And so if you're in the Black Swanlings group and you'd love to see Black Swan write a particular article about X, Y, or Z, you can always throw that into the group. Michael's going to make sure we hear about it. And the chances of us collaborating on that as a title or a topic area is really high. We love to source a lot of the ideas that go into the blog directly from our fans and our subscribers.
No, absolutely. And that's, joining the group is another resource for folks that want to get more involved, want to bounce ideas or questions off of people of the community. There's all different levels in terms of varying of experience. So wouldn't be afraid to join the group, get involved. I can say that we're just getting started, building a lot of momentum, and really all thanks to kind of the partnership with the Black Swan Group and the resources that they've provided us to cultivate this community and build it out to be able to support the community, because there's a lot of folks who are big fans of you guys.
Yeah, we're excited. I mean, our thing, right? Making money. Everybody wants to make money, right? Everybody's got bills to pay. But for us and the team that we have built around us at Black Swan, a deep-rooted passion is to just see people succeed. And just to be a small part of that transformation of someone changing their life or improving their lifestyle because their communication is at a whole nother level than what it was a year ago or 2 years ago, that's the real payout, and we love to speak to it from that angle too.
One thing that really caught me from a book called Difficult Conversations, Susan Scott, I believe, is the author, was not every conversation can change your life, but one conversation could change your life. So having that one difficult conversation can really change the trajectory of your life, whether that's your love life, your professional life, whatever it may be, is really, having that kind of radical, transparent conversation and using these tactics to really surrender yourself to listening and understand somebody's perspective before, responding and trying to explain.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, right? The whole idea is seek first to understand before trying to be understood. But the one conversation that could change your life, but we never know when that conversation is going to happen. Hence the motivation to stay sharp all the time, right? Because that conversation, you might get good today, but that conversation doesn't take place for 18 months. And we haven't been getting our repetitions in, and by 18 months, we're not as sharp as we were. That right there is enough of a motivation to keep getting that blade in the keep running that blade through the sharpener, right? Make sure that thing is good to go.
Sure. Yeah. So quick summary: if you're looking to get more involved, I'll post a link to the group in the comments. Also, the plethora of materials that are provided to you for free to the Black Swan Group. Go visit their page, opt into the blog, as well as consider some of the kind of preliminary courses. The N9 course, I believe the mindset course is one of the kind of early starter courses, just to wrap your head around kind of mindset and how to approach negotiations. But there's a lot out there for folks. And Brandon, really appreciate your time. You've been an amazing partner, to say the least, and I'm so happy I had the opportunity to have this conversation with you today.
The feeling is mutual, Michael. I love when we sit down and kick things around, right? You enhance our perspective just being able to kick things around with you. So yeah, it's my pleasure, and I love the fact that you're on this journey of helping people reach transformation along with us, right? It's a great thing.
My parents would be proud, so there you go. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Brandon. Look forward to continuing the partnership, and we'll talk soon.
As do I. I appreciate it, Michael.